What if the most powerful mineral for your heart, for your sleep, for those aching legs that wake you at 3 in the morning, was never sitting in a pharmacy bottle at all? What if it was sitting in a clay jar, in a stone kitchen, 3,000 years ago, written right there in the pages of your own Bible? Most people have no idea. While all of us are standing in line for one more prescription, one more sleeping aid, one more pill for the cramps and the racing heart, the scriptures already named the small, humble foods that carry the very mineral your body may be running short of. And modern nutrition science is finally, quietly, admitting they were right. Today I am going to show you 15 of them, 15 simple snacks, counted down from remarkable all the way to absolutely miraculous. Number 9 was sealed inside a Pharaoh's tomb, packed in a jar right beside his gold. And the Bible says God himself taught the farmer how to thresh it. Researchers have finally caught up. Hundreds of published studies on that one small black seed in the last 10 years alone. And number 1 is not just a snack. God commanded its blossom to be hammered into the golden lampstand of the temple, more than 20 times over, in pure gold. Heart doctors and sleep researchers are only now beginning to understand why. Hit subscribe because every single week we tie ancient wisdom back to modern science. Now let us begin. Number 15. Raisins. The cakes that woke a dying man. Turn with me to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 30, verse 12. David and his men find a man collapsed in an open field. An Egyptian servant, abandoned by his master. No food for 3 days. No water for 3 nights. He is finished. And what do they give him? Not medicine, not a physician. They give him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And Scripture says, his spirit came again to him. Sit with that for a second. His spirit came again to him. Now here is the part almost nobody notices. In the ancient world, pressed raisin cakes were not dessert. They were rations. They were what you handed a soldier before a march, what you carried into the wilderness, what you kept sealed away for the day everything went wrong. Sweet, yes, but dense, portable, and carrying far more than sugar. 100 grams of raisins holds roughly 32 milligrams of magnesium, along with a strong dose of potassium and a trace mineral called boron. Magnesium and potassium work as partners inside the body, and researchers have studied that partnership for years in connection with healthy blood pressure and normal muscle function. That is not a cure. That is a food doing quietly what food was designed to do. The old way of eating them was simple. A small handful, pressed into a cake, eaten slowly, usually alongside something with fat, like nuts or curds, so the sweetness landed gently. And somewhere along the way, we panicked about sugar and threw the whole basket out. The grape was never the enemy. The candy aisle was. Number 14. Dates. The honey of the palm tree. Here is something that surprises people. When the Bible speaks of a land flowing with milk and honey, many scholars believe that honey was not always coming from bees. It was flowing from the date palm. Thick, dark, amber syrup pressed out of the fruit. Psalm 92, verse 12, says, "The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree." And in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verse 19, when David finished bringing the ark into the city, he handed every single person in that enormous crowd, every man and every woman, a loaf of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of dates. That was the celebration food of an entire nation. Now the twist. A date palm can stand for 100 years in soil that would kill almost anything else. Its roots run deep enough to find water nobody else can reach. And whatever that tree pulls up out of the ground, it packs straight into the fruit. Dates carry somewhere around 54 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, plus potassium and a good amount of fiber, which is the reason that natural sweetness does not hit your system the way a spoonful of white sugar does. Traditionally, they were eaten 2 or 3 at a time, never by the handful, often stuffed with a nut, often served with something bitter, like strong tea. And now, before we go any further, one honest word. Everything in this video is here to teach and encourage you, not to replace your doctor. Please talk with your physician before you change your diet or anything you are taking. Ancient wisdom and good medicine were never meant to be enemies. Number 13. The dried fig. The poultice that healed a king. The fig tree appears more than 50 times across the scriptures, and one of those times is one of the strangest healing accounts in the entire Bible. In the book of 2 Kings, chapter 20, verse 7, King Hezekiah is dying. The prophet Isaiah gives an instruction that sounds almost too plain to matter. Take a lump of figs, lay it on the boil, and the king recovered. A lump of figs. Not a rare oil, not a ritual. Fruit, mashed, pressed onto skin. And here is what people miss. Figs were the wealth of a household. In 1 Samuel, chapter 25, verse 18, when Abigail had to stop an army at her own doorstep, part of what she loaded onto those donkeys was 200 cakes of figs. 200. That was a fortune riding out to make peace. Dried figs bring around 68 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, and, unusually for a fruit, a meaningful amount of calcium, along with potassium and fiber. Magnesium and calcium get studied constantly as a pair, because the body uses one to contract a muscle and the other to let it relax again. Bone researchers have taken a real interest in that balance for people over 50. 2 or 3 dried figs, soaked overnight in a little water, was the old morning habit. Soft, warm, easy on the stomach. Then somebody turned the fig into the filling for a cookie, and we forgot it was ever medicine. Number 12. The Carob pod. The prodigal's bread. This one hurts a little. In Luke chapter 15, verse 16, the young man has spent everything. He is broke, he is starving, and he is feeding pigs. And the text says he longed to fill his belly with the husks that the swine did eat. Those husks were carob pods, the food of the desperate, the food of animals, which is exactly why nobody wants to talk about it. But listen, there is an old tradition among Bible scholars that when John the Baptist lived on locusts in the wilderness, what he was eating may have been the pod of the carob tree, which was known as the locust bean. Whether that is so or not, one thing is certain. That tree fed people when nothing else would grow. Carob powder gives you roughly 54 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, plus calcium, fiber, and natural tannins. There is no caffeine in it and no theobromine, which is why it has been used for generations by people who love the taste of chocolate but cannot handle what chocolate does to their sleep or their stomach. The traditional way was to roast the pods, grind them, and stir the powder into warm milk at night. We replaced it with imported cocoa and sugar and called that progress. The tree that fed the starving now sits on a bottom shelf somewhere, ignored. Number 11. Roasted lentils. The stew worth a birthright. You know this story, Genesis chapter 25, verse 34. Esau comes in from the field, faint with hunger, and sells his birthright, his inheritance, his entire future, for a bowl of red lentil stew. We usually read that as a lesson about foolishness. Fair enough. But ask yourself the other question. What kind of food is so satisfying, so restoring to an exhausted man, that he would trade everything he owned for a single bowl of it? Lentils were the strength food of that whole region. In 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 28, when David is on the run and his men are starving in the wilderness, the supplies that arrive to save them include beans and lentils and parched grain. Notice that word. Parched, roasted, dry. Eaten by the handful, out of a pouch, on the move. That was the ancient snack food. Dry lentils are genuinely rich in magnesium, and they bring folate, iron, plant protein, and slow fiber right along with it. Nutrition researchers have studied pulses like these for decades in connection with steady blood sugar and healthy cholesterol levels, largely because of how slowly they release their energy. Roast them until they crackle. Salt them. Carry them in your pocket. That is the whole recipe. We stopped because they take an hour to cook, and we live in a world that wants everything in 90 seconds. Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of these. We trade ours for a bag of chips. Number 10. Roasted chickpeas. The soldier's parched pulse. Picture the scene in 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 28. David has fled the city. His own son has turned against him. His men are worn down, hungry, and afraid. And 3 men arrive with beds and basins and earthen vessels, and with wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse. Parched pulse. That is the Old English for roasted chickpeas. That is what was carried to a king in the worst hour of his life. Not a feast, a pouch of hard little roasted beans that would not spoil and would not slow a man down. Here is what makes them remarkable. Roast a chickpea and almost nothing is lost. The minerals stay, the protein stays, the fiber stays. Dried chickpeas hold well over 100 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, and they bring a serious amount of plant protein and slow-burning fiber with them, which is precisely why they held soldiers together on a long march. The traditional preparation could not be simpler. Soak them, dry them, roast them in a hot pan or over coals until the skin split and the whole kitchen smells nutty. Then salt them with a little cumin. And what did we do with the food that sustained a fleeing king? We mashed it into a dip, sealed it in a plastic tub, and forgot it could ever be something you carry in your hand. Number 9. The black cumin seed. The seed God taught the farmer to thresh. Now we come to the one I promised you. Open to Isaiah chapter 28, verses 25 through 27. The prophet is describing a farmer, and he says something extraordinary. The farmer scatters the fitches and sows the cumin. And then this. The fitches are not threshed with a threshing instrument, but the fitches are beaten out with a staff. Fitches. That is the old word for the black cumin seed, called ketza in Hebrew. And read the verse just before it. It says God does instruct him and teach him. God taught the farmer how to handle this particular seed, because if you crush it the way you crush grain, you destroy it. That is how precious this thing was. And here's the part that stops people cold. Archaeologists found these seeds in the tomb of Tutankhamun, sealed away with the gold, packed for the afterlife of a pharaoh. Somebody looked at a jar of small black seeds and decided it belonged next to a king's treasure. Then, for centuries, the Western world forgot the seed entirely, until laboratories identified the compound inside it, called thymoquinone, and the research quietly exploded. Hundreds of published studies in the last decade alone, looking at inflammation, at immune response, at metabolic health. Not one of them makes it a cure for anything. And I will not sit here and tell you it is. But the world is paying attention again. It also carries a striking amount of magnesium, roughly 265 milligrams per 100 grams of seed. Traditionally, a quarter teaspoon of the seeds was chewed or stirred into a spoonful of honey once a day in the morning. Sitting in a pharaoh's tomb, named by a prophet, and missing from almost every spice rack in America. Now, before we keep going, do me one small favor. If any of this has been news to you so far, tap that like button. It costs you nothing, it takes 1 second, and it is honestly the only reason videos like this ever reach the people who need them. Thank you. I mean that. Number 8. Parched barley, the widow's handful. Barley appears more than 30 times in Scripture, and it is almost always the food of ordinary people. The poor ate barley. The rich ate wheat. In the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verse 14, Boaz calls the young widow over at mealtime and reaches her parched grain, and she ate, and was sufficed, and left. She was filled, and she still had some left to carry home to her mother-in-law, from a handful of roasted barley. And in John, chapter 6, verse 9, when 5,000 people needed feeding, the boy in that crowd did not have wheat bread in his basket. He had 5 barley loaves, the cheapest bread there was. That is what Jesus took and blessed and multiplied. Here is the piece we lost. Whole barley carries a soluble fiber called beta-glucan, and it holds a solid amount of magnesium, somewhere between 80 and 130 milligrams per 100 grams, depending on how little has been stripped away. Beta-glucan is one of the most studied fibers in the world in relation to healthy cholesterol and steady blood sugar. Whole barley, mind you, not the polished pearl kind that has had its outer layers scrubbed off. Roasted barley, salted, eaten by the small handful, sometimes ground and stirred into cold water as a summer drink. Wheat won the marketing war. Barley got sent out to feed the livestock. The grain that filled a widow and fed 5,000 people is now something most Americans have never once tasted. Number 7. Coriander seed. The seed manna was measured against. This one gives me chills, and I want you to see why. Exodus chapter 16, verse 31. The people of Israel are in the wilderness, and bread is falling out of heaven. Moses has to describe something no human being had ever seen. So what does he reach for? He writes that the manna was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Out of every seed and grain and fruit in that entire world, the one chosen to describe the bread of heaven was this one. And most of us have only ever met the leaf. We know it as the green herb that people either love or absolutely cannot stand. But the seed is a completely different creature, warm, citrusy, sweet, almost floral when you toast it. Coriander seed carries roughly 330 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, along with iron, manganese, and its own aromatic oils. Now, let us be honest about serving sizes here. Nobody sits down to 100 grams of seed. But this is exactly where these small things add up across a day, a teaspoon at a time, the way people used to actually eat. The old use was to toast the seeds in a dry pan until they popped, crush them lightly, and stir them into bread, into stewed lentils, into warm water after a heavy meal to settle the stomach. Heaven's own bread was described by this seed. And here we are, throwing the seed away and keeping the garnish. Number 6. Cumin seed. The tithe of the Pharisees. There is a rebuke in Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, that most people read straight past. Jesus says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law." Read that again. These men were so meticulous that they counted out 1/10 of their cumin seeds and gave it to God. Now think about what that tells you. You do not tithe on something worthless. Cumin was real wealth. It was traded, weighed, taxed, and stored under lock. Isaiah mentions it too, in that same 28th chapter, beaten out gently with a rod so the seed would not be crushed. Cumin seed holds roughly 366 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, and it is unusually high in iron. It has been used across the Middle East and India for centuries as a digestive aid, and modern work has looked at its compounds in connection with digestion and blood sugar regulation. Used, again, the way real people used it, a pinch here, a teaspoon there, every single day for a lifetime. Toast the whole seeds. Grind them fresh. Use them that same week. And here is where we ruin it. We buy cumin already ground, in a little jar, and it sits above the stove for 3 years, losing everything it ever had. The Pharisees tithed on this. We let it go stale in a cabinet. Number 5. The mustard seed. The smallest seed, the largest faith. Everyone knows this verse. Matthew chapter 13, verse 31. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree. We have heard it so many times that we hear it as a metaphor and nothing more. But Jesus was not reaching for a poetic image out of thin air. He was pointing at something every person standing in that crowd had sitting in their kitchen. Here is what almost nobody realizes. Mustard seed is among the most mineral-dense things you can put in your mouth. Roughly 370 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, plus selenium, plus the sulfur compounds called glucosinolates that give it that sharp bite in the back of your nose. Those compounds are studied heavily for the way the body handles inflammation and clears out what it does not need. The traditional use was tiny and constant, seeds cracked into oil, a spoonful stirred into a warm compress and laid across an aching chest or a stiff shoulder, a practice grandmothers in this country still remembered 100 years ago. And what became of it? We took the seed of the kingdom of heaven, ground it up, dyed it bright yellow, filled it with vinegar and sugar, and squeezed it onto a hot dog. Faith the size of a mustard seed. Maybe it was never only about the size. Number 4. Walnuts, the garden of nuts. There is a single line in the Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 11, and it is easy to miss. I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley. The Hebrew word there is egos, and scholars have long understood it to mean the walnut. A walled garden, in the middle of the greatest love poem in Scripture, planted with walnut trees. These were not growing wild. Somebody carried those trees in, planted them, watered them, and then waited years for them to bear. That is what you do for something you consider valuable. And then there is the shape of the thing, which people have remarked on for centuries. Crack a walnut open, and you are looking at two halves, ridged and folded, sitting inside a hard shell. It looks like a brain. The old herbalists thought that was a sign left for us. They were guessing, but they were not entirely wrong about what it does. A walnut carries around 158 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, and it is the only common nut with a substantial amount of the plant-based omega-3 fat called alpha-linolenic acid. The research on walnuts and heart health is some of the most consistent research we have on any whole food. It supports. It helps. It is not a cure, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling you something. 7 halves a day. That is the old measure, and it is still a good one. Eat them raw, keep them cold, and if they taste bitter and sharp, throw them out, because that is the oil gone rancid. We skip them because they cost more than a bag of crackers. Somebody once planted a garden for these. Number 3. Melon and gourd seeds. The only food Israel wept for. Numbers chapter 11, verse 5. The people are in the wilderness. They are eating bread that fell out of heaven, and they are crying. Listen to what they are crying for. We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. They wept for melons. In slavery, that was the good part. Now here is the twist, and it is the biggest one in this entire list. It was never really about the sweet flesh. In the ancient world, from Egypt all the way through to Persia, the seeds of the melon and the gourd were dried, salted, roasted, and eaten. They were sold in markets. They were kept in sealed jars. The flesh was refreshment. The seed was food. And the seed is the reason this sits at number 3. Melon and gourd seeds carry something in the range of 550 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams. That is the highest of anything I have named today, higher than any nut on this entire list, along with zinc, iron, and plant protein. 550 milligrams, out of the part you scrape into the trash. The old way was to rinse the seeds, dry them in the sun, toast them in a dry pan with salt, and eat them slowly, cracking them open one at a time. Exactly the way people still do in that part of the world today. An entire nation sat down in the desert and wept remembering these. We cut the melon open, scoop out the treasure, throw it away, and eat the water. Number 2. Pistachios, the tribute Jacob sent to Egypt. Genesis chapter 43, verse 11. There is a famine across the whole world. Jacob is an old man, frightened, sending his sons back to Egypt to beg for grain from a ruler who could destroy them with a word. And he tells them, "Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and carry down the man a present. A little balm, and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds." That word nuts, in the Hebrew, is botnim, the pistachio. Understand what you are looking at. There is a famine on. Food is worth more than silver, and a starving father digs into his very last stores and sends pistachios as a gift fit for the second most powerful man on earth, sitting right there in the same sentence as myrrh and balm and spices. That is how the Bible ranks this little green nut. Pistachios carry roughly 120 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, and they are unusually rich in vitamin B6 and potassium, and in the pigments lutein and zeaxanthin, which is why they are green in the first place. Those two pigments are among the most studied compounds on Earth for protecting aging eyes. A small handful, still in the shell, eaten slowly, is the traditional serving. And the shell is part of the point. It slows you down. And now they sit in a plastic bowl on a bar somewhere, salted into oblivion. A gift for a king, reduced to something people eat without ever looking at it. Number 1. The almond, the rod that bloomed overnight. Here it is, and I want you to sit with this one because it is not like the others. Numbers chapter 17, verse 8. Israel is in rebellion. 12 dead wooden rods are laid before the Lord overnight, one for each tribe, and in the morning Moses goes in, and the rod of Aaron has budded, and brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, and yielded almonds. Not a sign in the sky, not thunder, a dead stick that grew almonds overnight. And it goes further than that. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 33, when God gives the exact design for the golden lampstand that would stand in his own presence, he specifies the shape of every cup on it. 3 bowls made like unto almonds in one branch, a knop and a flower. Branch after branch after branch. More than 20 almond blossoms hammered out of a single piece of pure gold. Of everything that grows on this earth, the almond blossom is the shape God chose for the lamp that burned before him. And the Hebrew name tells you why. The almond is called shaked, which comes from the word to watch or to awaken. It is the first tree in the land of Israel to bloom, blossoming in the dead of winter while everything around it is still asleep. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 11, God asks the prophet what he sees. And Jeremiah answers, a rod of an almond tree. And God says, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. The tree that wakes up first. So what is actually inside it? About 270 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams, which puts it near the top of every whole food on this list. Vitamin E, in one of the highest concentrations found in any food on earth. Riboflavin, calcium, healthy fat and fiber together, which is why a handful of almonds steadies you instead of spiking you. And here is where the awakening tree meets the modern laboratory. Magnesium is required for hundreds of different enzyme reactions in the human body. The reactions your heart uses to hold a steady rhythm. The reactions your muscles use to let go and relax after they contract. The reactions involved in producing the hormone that tells your body it is finally time to sleep. Researchers looking at magnesium in older adults keep circling back to the same territory, over and over. Sleep quality, muscle cramping, blood pressure, bone density. Nobody is claiming that a handful of nuts replaces a single thing your doctor has prescribed for you, and I would never say that to you. But it is worth noticing, is it not, that the tree God carved into his own lamp, the tree named for waking up, carries the mineral your body uses to finally rest. The traditional way was gentle. A small handful, soaked overnight in water, the skins slipped off in the morning, eaten before anything else. And what have we done with it? We took the almond, added 12 parts water, poured it into a carton, and called it milk. The blossom God chose for his lampstand, watered down to almost nothing. So let us stand back and look at the whole table. 15 foods: raisins, dates, and figs, carob, lentils, and chickpeas, black cumin and barley, coriander, cumin, and mustard, walnuts, melon seeds, pistachios, and the almond. Do you notice what is not on that list? Nothing rare, nothing expensive, nothing you have to order from the other side of the world. Not one single thing that required a laboratory to make it. Every one of them is a seed, a nut, or a fruit, dried or roasted or cracked open by hand, exactly the way somebody would have carried it in a pouch across a hillside in Galilee. That is the pattern, and I do not believe for a moment that it is an accident. We have been trained to look for healing in complicated places, in a bottle, in a formula, in something that costs a great deal of money and has a name we cannot pronounce. And all the while, the mineral that hundreds of processes in your body depend on has been sitting quietly inside the smallest and plainest things on this earth. In a handful of seeds, in a fistful of parched grain handed to a widow at lunchtime, in a dead rod that bloomed overnight. None of this replaces your doctor. Keep taking what you have been given and keep those appointments. But you are allowed to eat the way the people in the book ate, a handful of almonds instead of a handful of crackers, toasted seeds instead of a sleeve of cookies, figs soaked overnight instead of something out of a wrapper. Small changes, made faithfully, over years. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean that. Did your mother or your grandmother keep one of these in the house? Was it the figs? The barley? A jar of little black seeds that nobody could quite explain? Tell me down in the comments, because those stories are the best part of this whole channel, and I read every single one of them. And if this blessed you today, subscribe and ring that bell, because every week we take one more thread of ancient wisdom and follow it all the way into the modern laboratory. And it keeps leading us back to the very same place. The God who made your body also planted the field. He did not leave you without provision. He never has. Thank you for spending this time with me. God bless you, and I will see you next week.